How China won the oil war and left the US begging. A shift in global power. In a world where superpowers once dictated the rules, a new reality is unfolding. The United States, once the unchallenged leader of global energy diplomacy, now finds itself at a crossroads, one paved by China's strategic brilliance and America's diplomatic missteps. This is the story of how Beijing outmaneuvered Washington in the high-stakes world of oil and energy, leaving the US with no option but to beg for cooperation, even at the cost of accepting crippling tariffs. The oil trade battle ignites. It started with an ultimatum. The US demanded that China stop buying oil from Russia and Iran. The reasoning? To isolate two regimes under American sanctions and maintain control over global oil flows.
Hundreds of millions of people have moved from the countryside to the city, and they are making things. More than just t-shirts, toys, and tables. They're making semiconductors and solar panels, new port facilities, highways, railways, pipelines, fiber optic networks. But follow the oil. Like any explosively growing economy, here's how much crude oil China imported over roughly that same period of time. This is as expected, because when you're building factories, infrastructure, entire cities, you need what oil gives you, which is fuel, plastic, chemicals, even the roads that gas-burning cars are driving on.
But China didn't blink. Instead, it did something far more devastating. It turned America's pressure into fuel for its own rise. Rather than bow to Washington's threats, Beijing deepened its energy partnerships with Russia, Iran, Venezuela, and Central Asia. Chinese tankers, protected by the so-called Dark Fleet, sailed in stealth, ensuring that oil continued to flow regardless of US sanctions. America, meanwhile, overplayed its hand. Tariff threats backfired. Allies grew frustrated. And China, with its enormous appetite and state-backed oil reserves, had already diversified its supply lines while Washington was busy trying to police the world. China's master strategy. While the US was focused on punishing Canada over aluminum tariffs and forcing Europe into security negotiations, China was wide awake, building long-term energy alliances. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, Beijing struck deals with more than 50 countries, laying down energy pipelines, refineries, and logistics hubs. They weren't just buying oil, they were buying influence. The US, meanwhile, found itself spread thin, sanctioning here, threatening there, but failing to recognize the silent storm brewing in the east. Counterclockwise arrows tariffs turn into trade.
But here's the magic trick. The last 5 or so years, crude oil imports leveling off, even dropping in some years. How'd they do that? How did they reduce their dependence on the lifeblood of modern industry, the thing America produces more of than any other country?
So for the last 12, 15 years, certainly, China has been on a quiet and increasingly visible push to become the renewable energy superpower of the world.
China is the world's #1 importer of crude oil, about 11 million barrels of oil a day, which is most of the roughly 14, 15 million barrels of oil it uses a day. But over time, China began to acknowledge the possibility, the threat, that if the US decided one day it wanted to harm China, it could choke off its supply. Because while you can move oil by rail and you can move it by pipeline, most oil is delivered by ship in giant tankers. China actually gets 90% of its crude oil this way, and that is a strategic vulnerability.
China's vision, energy independence. China's strategy wasn't just about today, it was about the next 50 years. They built massive oil reserves, invested trillions into renewables, and led the world in electric vehicle production. While the US scrambled to revive its shale industry and rebuild supply chains, China was already exporting batteries, EVs, and solar panels at scale. It was energy dominance, redefined. The US humbling moment. In a stunning development, US trade officials quietly requested a back-channel dialogue with Chinese energy regulators. The goal? To coordinate on oil flow disruptions, prevent a global supply shock, and ensure some level of cooperation. The same country that once dictated terms, now pleading for dialogue. It wasn't surrender, but it was close. A headline from late July said it all: US seeks stability in energy ties with China, even at 100% tariffs. Speech balloon what China said. In a fiery statement, China's foreign ministry posted. China will always ensure its energy supply in ways that serve our national interests. Coercion and pressuring will not achieve anything. China will firmly defend its sovereignty, security, and development interests. Translation: Beijing isn't just ignoring Washington's demands, it's declaring independence from them. Bomb how it all went wrong for the US. Years of sanctions, overreach, and aggressive foreign policy have eroded US influence. China patiently waited, and when the moment came, it struck with precision. Instead of cutting China off, Washington cut itself off from cheap energy, global goodwill, and long-term allies. China didn't have to fight. The US imploded under its own weight. The global reaction. Around the world, leaders are watching. And many are choosing sides. India ramped up trade with Russia. Gulf states welcomed Chinese investments. Africa doubled down on BRI projects. Latin America warmed to Beijing's energy offers. Washington tried to retaliate. A 100% tariff was proposed on Chinese goods if Beijing didn't halt oil imports from Russia and Iran. But China didn't flinch. In fact, it exported more, absorbing the tariffs, and passing the cost to US importers and consumers. American businesses screamed. Inflation surged. Manufacturers struggled. Eventually, in a stunning reversal, US trade officials signaled that they were open to negotiations, and yes, even willing to keep the 100% tariffs, just to maintain access to Chinese oil trade and supply chains. From a threat to a plea, the US was cornered. Oil drum how oil built the New World Order. China understood something crucial. Oil isn't just energy, it's leverage. Every barrel delivered to its refineries was a move on the global chessboard. By continuing to trade with sanctioned nations, China not only secured cheap energy, it propped up allies, built debt-based influence, and became the de facto energy broker for the global south. Meanwhile, the US alienated nations like Venezuela, drove Iran deeper into China's orbit, and pushed Russia toward Beijing in ways the West could never fully reverse. Chart with downward trend, US isolation and economic fallout. As China strengthened ties across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, the US found itself increasingly isolated. Former allies now negotiated trade in yuan. Petrodollar dominance weakened. Even Saudi Arabia, long America's strategic partner, began trading more oil in non-dollar terms. Back home, the consequences were painful. Gas prices soared. Supply chains cracked. Political pressure mounted in Washington. And all the while, China kept winning, not with missiles or threats, but with oil contracts and quiet diplomacy. Stay tuned. The energy war is far from over. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more in-depth global power analysis. And let us know in the comments, did China just win the biggest geopolitical game of the decade?